This was the tail end of my Demetri Martin is my guy.
Did you you're speaking on behalf of America, the industry, and everyone in general.
Well, that's what was weird is that I did feel like I would go to those $25 shows. I spent my like 18th birthday like seeing Demetri Martin with my mom at like one of those shows, you know?
I will never forget being in college in another country, but still like watching The Daily Show, and him doing one of his little. Remember, he would do those sort of segments.
Yeah, he was a
his first ever segment where he says he's talking about like the youth, and he says to someone like, "Start this sentence," and then just stares at them rather than finish it. And us just being like, "That's the funniest thing we've like." You know, him like cracking our brains open. So I was all in on him for like 1 year.
Yeah.
And then I was just like, he just does the same thing over and over again. And I got like so sick of him.
I'd say
I was out on him very fast.
I think I had 4 or 5 years.
He's cute though.
Where he was my guy. He very much spoke to like teenage Griffin. There was a level of like the postmodern sort of like, I'm going to push the boundaries of what this thing is, the craft that went into it. And also just I was super into that kind of earnestness and sincerity.
He was also one of those people who was deceptively old. Like he was already like 37.
That was the crazy thing I'd hear about him. Because I'd have like older friends like in the comedy scene when I was like the 16-year-old like going into the UCB. And then I knew the people who were like 30 and they'd be like, that guy's like older than me. And I like sat next to him at a bar, and he's really weird.
He's weird. And then I remember Maron despised him.
Correct.
Like as a concept more, not as a person.
It's one of the best Maron stories of all time.
The early WTF stories, like this fucking guy with his guitar. Like you could just tell it hates him.
He came in with a fucking skateboard. No, one of my favorite Maron being an asshole stories is that Demetri somehow got passed at the Comedy Cellar despite that not being the kind of place that would seem to be welcoming of him because he was so different. Like there was no one else trying to do anything.
Right. He would do jokes about like graphs.
But also, he would just make a graph. The joke was about the graph. The graph was the joke.
The graph was the joke delivery.
It wasn't like, you ever notice when you're looking at a graph that... It was more like, I'm going to draw a graph.
And if he made a graph joke, it would be told using bells. It wouldn't be... He'd never use a graph for a graph. He'd use one medium to tell a different joke. But like, I just remember his Comedy Central Presents special was like, he was the guy who figured out the commercial act breaks so that he made each act of his special very distinct structurally. And I was just like, fuck, this is what I want to do. And I was like... This sort of overlapped with me being in denial about wanting to be funny, like wanting to be a comedian.
You imagine how many comedians like yourself were on their way after watching that to Staples to buy a pad of paper and a marker.
100% me. 100% me.
Suddenly Staples became the hot place for young comics because of Demetri Martin.
Office Max is like, who are all these losers?
When I started doing comedy, I was so prop heavy in that kind of way with like poster boards and like PowerPoint slides.
Quick question. Were you the worst comedian of all time when you were doing that? Would you admit?
No, I was kind of pretty good at that. I would say, honestly, I became the worst comedian of all time after that.
Okay, fair.
Like, I was pretty good at that, and then I was like, fuck, I should try to do traditional stand-up, and then I was really bad for a while.
Oh, you're a good stand-up.
I'm bad for a while.
Okay.
Past tense.
I didn't know you back then, probably.
Right. Yeah. No, but I was doing my like Demetri Martin ripoff stuff, and it was working really well for a bit. But I did feel that prejudice.
It is a little limiting.
Yes, it felt a little limiting, and it was also like I got to show up every night with my like bucket full of glitter and everything. Like I just felt like a loser. The night where it hit the apex was my
like
agent,
Andy Kindler seething at you.
Yeah, because I used to do this bit that was me doing like myself from the future had time traveled back to give me my stand-up routine.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
And the stand-up routine was all about how I shouldn't do comedy. And it was like delivered by the heroin addict, like junkie living in a space car version of myself who was trying to like rewrite the past so he wouldn't end up so destitute. And I had like glitter and a time capsule and all this shit. And it like did well. And my agent was like sending it around to people. And he was like, great news, this like new Comedy Central stand-up show, they really responded well. They want you to do a showcase to maybe be on the show. And I was like, oh, shit. And I went to this showcase at a traditional stand-up club. And I was like, hey, I'm at a which I mostly wasn't doing. I was doing like comedy theaters and basement bars or whatever. Yeah. And I was like, hey, I'm here for the showcase. And they went, you're here for the showcase? And I went, yeah. And they went, for the Def Jam showcase?
Oh, my God.
And it was a show called Russell Simmons Presents The Ruckus. That was him trying to do Def Jam at a different network without the Def Jam name. And I was the only white comedian.
Oh, no.
You're the Jim Carrey.
Everyone else was doing traditional stand-up, and I was first up with a bucket of glitter.
How did that go?
Horribly.
Because what I would have done is quit comedy and possibly America. Like I would have just fled the country.
It was so bad that it actually warped the rest of the show, because then everyone
had to come on and be like, what the fuck was that?
Yeah, because every comic was like, this is my chance to get on TV. I got a tight 5. I've been honing for years. Let me just do the exact jokes I have planned. And then they got on stage and had to address glitter for the first 90 seconds because it was still on the mic. It was still on the stage.
First of all, I don't want to know what the glitter was for. I think it's better as a mystery.
100%.
That you just have a bucket and somehow it ends up everywhere.
Pointedly haven't told you why I use it.
No, I think it's better left unsaid.
Yes.
But the point is,
Demetri.
I think, can you imagine what a sure thing it was for him being put in this movie?
Oh, 100%.
Like, can you imagine the enthusiasm where it's like, you're this alt comic.
Right.
You've kind of broken out above a lot of your peers.
Right. Yes.
The guy who just won people Oscars for his last American movie.
Right.
You're the guy. You're in the movie now.
Well, and you talk about the $25 show thing. When I was going to him escalating to playing like rock clubs and things like that, right? It was like he feels like he's maybe in the stage that Steve Martin was in right before The Jerk, where he's just got such a loyal following for doing this weird postmodern thing. And the question is, like, how is he going to translate it? And I think he had done he'd started doing important things.
Important things like making this movie.
Important Things is 09 this year. Yeah,
right. Because I know that was like they
had a great Mulaney wrote on that show, and like
there's
Dan
some really
Mintz,
good bits on that show. It's not consistent, but I think they signed him up for that show in 2006. Jon Stewart,
John Benjamin, I think, wrote on that show.
Yes, Leo Allen, all those guys. Jon Stewart like developed like the 3 or 4 Daily Show spinoffs he wants to do. Set up in 2007, maybe. And then the show took a long time to actually get made because he booked this and it put everything on hold. But the thing that happened before that was he was going to play the second lead in Moneyball.
Right. In Soderbergh's
Steven
Moneyball.
Soderbergh's Moneyball, it was going to be Brad Pitt and Demetri Martin instead of Jonah Hill.
And then like David Justice was going to be the third lead, right? Like
Playing
he had the pitch where like the baseball players could just play themselves. Yeah.
And he said there was a character that was like Clippy from MS Word who was going to explain all the stats on screen. Jesus. He had like real life interviews. It sounded insane. And they pulled the plug on that movie a week before it started filming. And it felt like Demetri Martin was in that state. Was like, okay, he's getting a TV show. Someone's going to figure out how to make him a movie star. He had sold like 3 scripts to DreamWorks that were constantly like in development. As of like 4 years ago, Michelle Hasnavicius was going to make one of them with Zach Galifianakis and Paul Rudd.
Oh, interesting.
He had a high concept movie.
He's going to make the worst movie of all time?
It wasn't the one that actually got made.
Sure.
It was a different script that he had sold to DreamWorks, and Spielberg was like, this is great. Pitch me more movies. And I think Spielberg bought like 3 of his pitches. So it was this notion of like, even if he wasn't for everyone, somehow he's got like a youth audience, like 17-year-old Griffin Newman in the palm of his hands.
Right. So they knew they could count on you coming to see any Woodstock movie he was in.
Right. Then Soderbergh was the guy who was like, I'm going to give him a supporting part in a movie. Right. That movie falls apart. But he had sort of gotten the sheen of like a serious director was going to give him a big role. I guess he can act.
People assume, right.
So then when he was announced as the lead for this, it was, wow, that's fucking strange. But also, I guess that means he's really got the goods.
That's the other Ang Lee thing. Like, when you hear that, you weren't like, that seems stupid in stunt casting. You're just like, I guess.
Yeah, I put my faith in he knows what he's doing or whatever.
I really wanted to find like the IMDb trivia list of other actors that were considered. I couldn't find anything.
Well, the problem with it is like just everyone's just decided not to care about this movie. There's just nothing. It's not like people are even mean. But if you just like if you look at Ang Lee's Wikipedia page, it goes like then he made Lust Caution paragraph, and then after taking Woodstock, he made Life of Pi. Like, there's just no acknowledgement of it,
They sort of treat this movie like the 13th floor of the building, where it just goes from 12 to 14.
I really wanted to know who else could have been in the mix. It's also weird, too, jumping around, but Adam Pally, who I know is in this movie, and he said something once about another performer, and he was like, this actor making this movie is like if Jim Carrey went from In Living Color to The Majestic. And I was like, that's a great way to look at the arc of some people's careers. And that's exactly what this is like. Right. It's like, this guy's kind of popping. What should we put him in? A super low-key drama instead of something that utilizes anything people like about him.
It's a very odd situation. Now, the 2 things I think of are, I think Seamus said that he was the one who kind of picked Demetri Martin because his daughters had showed him clips of his stand-up.
Uh-huh.
And I know I was in a stage where I was like the annoying, like, Garden State, like, listen to this, will change your life person with like Demetri Martin bits at parties for like an insufferable number of
God,
years.
I really think about somehow how good it is that we weren't friends in certain years.
When you would put your headphones on someone at the party, would you describe the chart he was drawing?
Really coming at him too hard?
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind
Thank
of
you.
person is a nightmare.
Excuse
you have to
me.
listen to this comedy bit at a party.
Excuse me. 3 comedy points to Alex. He made a joke that you guys didn't even hear because you were so busy dunking on me.
I'm sorry.
At the expense
What
of the
was his
podcast.
joke? I'm sorry.
I asked if when Griffin put his headphones on someone at a party and said, listen to this bit, he was like, now what he's drawing when he says this, you can't see it because I recorded this off of my TV, but it's really funny. He's doing this thing that's like a stick figure, but it doesn't really look like a person.
He's doing a joke about the shape of the state of Wyoming.
For the record, it was more me making people watch YouTube clips.
Sure. In the early days of doing that.
But it felt a little similar to me too. I also, if I met myself as at that age now, I would never want to speak to him ever again.